The sound of running water filled the grand bathroom as Cynthia stepped into the shower, unaware of the eyes that watched her from the cracked door. Aiden Harrington, heir to the Harrington Empire, stood frozen in the doorway, his breath catching at the sight of the woman he could never have. She wasn't just a maid. She was everything he'd been told to stay away from. But the moment their eyes met, everything changed. His heart raced, his mind clouded. But before he could turn and leave, Cynthia whispered, "Don't pretend like you didn't see me." He froze. What had he just done? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. She had known from the moment she started working at the Harrington mansion that the life of a maid was one of invisibility. She was never supposed to be seen. And certainly not by the man who was the heir to one of the world's largest empires. But when she heard the creak of the door, that slight shift of wood against the frame, her heart skipped. She froze, body tensing as the reality of her situation flooded in. The billionaire's son. The future of the entire Harrington Empire. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this wing of the house. He had his own part of the mansion, miles away from the servants' quarters, from the basement kitchen, from the laundry room where Cynthia spent her days. But somehow, today, fate had brought them together in the most intimate of settings. Aiden's gaze fell on her instantly, his eyes wide, frozen for a moment, as if the universe had stilled just for this one brief encounter. She could see his reflection in the fogged-up mirror, his jaw slightly slack. His face was young, handsome, the kind of face that people paid money to see in magazines. A golden boy, born into a legacy so untouchable it would crush anyone who even tried. But in this moment, in this bathroom filled with steam and silence, he wasn't the heir to an empire. He was just a man, looking at a woman who had never mattered in his world. At least, that's what she had convinced herself of. But his eyes told a different story. The hunger, the confusion, and the longing that crossed his face were unmistakable. His hand shook ever so slightly as he stood there, rooted in place, mouth half open, struggling to form words. Cynthia's breath hitched in her throat, and instinctively, she reached for the towel hanging nearby, wrapping it around herself. She felt her skin burn from both the heat of the water and the impossible reality of what had just happened. "You weren't supposed to be here," she whispered, her voice faltering. Aiden shook his head, his gaze never leaving hers. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but his eyes were still wide, full of something unspoken. "I didn't mean to," he said, voice thick with a rawness that surprised even him. "I'm sorry. I thought." "What did you think?" she interrupted, her heart racing. "What are you doing here?" Aiden's expression shifted, the weight of the moment sinking into him. He had seen her. Not as a maid, not as an invisible worker in the house, but as something else. Something real. Something untouchable. He paused, unable to form the words, and instead stepped backward, as if the distance might make the situation less absurd. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." Cynthia didn't know why she didn't just shout at him, tell him to leave, tell him to never look at her again. She didn't know why her heart didn't just snap under the strain of this impossible situation. But instead, she stared at him, caught between the rage of being violated and the shocking truth of how much she had wanted him, even though she could never, ever have him. Not in a world like this. Aiden turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Cynthia spoke again, this time her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't pretend like you didn't see me." He stopped, his hand on the door, and turned slowly. There was no arrogance in his expression now. No entitlement. Just something that resembled shame, regret, and an emotion he couldn't yet name. He looked at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Aiden whispered, "I wasn't pretending." Have you ever felt trapped by circumstances that made you long for something you could never have? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Cynthia had always known her place. From the moment she stepped into the Harrington mansion as a young woman, she had been conditioned to be invisible. To serve. To keep her head down, speak when spoken to, and never, under any circumstance, disrupt the delicate balance of the Harrington family's world. She was a maid, a mere background player in the lives of the powerful and wealthy. It wasn't just the vast marble halls, the glittering chandeliers, or the endless rooms of antiques and fine art that made her feel like she didn't belong. It was the distance, the unspoken line between her and them, a line she was reminded of every time she looked at Aiden Harrington, the son of one of the world's most powerful families. A golden boy, groomed to inherit everything. She had seen him as a child, running through the halls with a carefree grin, completely unaware of the weight of class that she carried with her like an invisible chain. But now, he was a man, handsome, confident, and utterly out of reach. She had seen him more times than she could count, walking through the mansion with his casual arrogance. His perfectly styled hair. His immaculate suits. His easy laughter that never seemed to touch the cold, hard truth of his world. And Cynthia? She was the maid. She was here to clean, to cook, to stay silent and never, ever be seen. Her mother had worked as a maid in similar homes all her life. Cynthia had grown up in small, cramped apartments, always with the scent of detergent and cleaning products lingering in the air. There was no room for dreams, no room for hope. Her future was already mapped out. Work hard, keep your head down, and never ask for anything more. But with Aiden, everything felt different. The one time she had allowed herself to wonder what it would be like to be seen as more, she felt the weight of her reality crush her back into place. She would never be allowed to cross that invisible line. Aiden had been born into a world of perfection. The Harrington name was one that opened doors, that made people bow and scrape for a chance to be seen by him. His father, Victor Harrington, had built a fortune from the ground up. From nothing. It had taken everything, ambition, ruthlessness, and an unyielding sense of purpose, to get to where they were. And Aiden? Aiden was supposed to inherit it all. His life had been laid out before him since birth. His path was clear, one of luxury, power, and privilege. He was taught to never question his worth, to never wonder about the cost of what he had, or who had helped build it. His world was inaccessible to people like Cynthia. But lately, Aiden had begun to feel the weight of that inheritance, the suffocating expectations that came with it. His father's pressure to prove himself. His mother's cold indifference. The constant reminders that he wasn't just a son, he was the heir. The future. The one who would take the family's name to new heights, or destroy it entirely. For years, he had kept his distance from the staff. He didn't want to think about them, or wonder about their lives. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was simply that the world had taught him that they weren't his world. But when he saw Cynthia that day, standing there, drenched in steam and silence, everything he had believed about himself, about the world, about the lines that separated them, began to crumble. He had never seen her like that. So raw. So real. And in that moment, he wasn't just a wealthy heir looking at a maid. He was a man who had seen something in her that he couldn't ignore. And it terrified him. Neither Cynthia nor Aiden had ever truly acknowledged the desire they felt for each other. In her eyes, he was the man who could never see her. And in his eyes, she was the woman he was not allowed to see. But in the quiet corners of the mansion, when their paths crossed just for a moment, there was an unspoken tension. The smallest glances, the brief touches, the fleeting moments that made both of them wonder, what if? Aiden found himself watching her more often than he should, when she walked through the hallways, when she cleaned, when she passed him by without even meeting his eyes. She was invisible, but to him, it felt like she was everywhere. Cynthia, too, had caught herself staring at him, at his confidence, his effortless beauty. But it was always followed by guilt, by the knowledge that she could never be part of his world. She didn't belong. And yet, a part of her longed for the chance to break free from the roles they had been given. Their worlds were so far apart. Could love ever exist in a place like this? One night, as Aiden lay in his opulent bedroom staring up at the ceiling, something shifted within him. He couldn't stop thinking about the bathroom, about the way Cynthia had looked at him, not with anger, but with a mixture of fear and longing. And when she spoke, when she whispered, "Don't pretend like you didn't see me," it felt like an invitation. But he knew the rules. He knew the consequences. He couldn't go back. He couldn't cross that line. Not just because of the world he came from, but because she was different. She was real, and he wasn't ready for that. If you were Aiden, would you pursue the person you desire even if it meant risking everything you've known? Or would you keep your distance? Share your thoughts below. 2 weeks had passed since that moment in the bathroom. The moment Cynthia and Aiden had shared. Since then, the mansion had gone eerily quiet. The tension between them lingered, unspoken, buried beneath layers of daily routine. Cynthia had tried to push it out of her mind. She kept her head down, worked harder than ever, and avoided any interaction with Aiden. She couldn't risk being noticed. Not again. Her heart was in turmoil, torn between her responsibilities and her emotions. She had always known her place, but that moment with Aiden had made her question everything. Aiden, on the other hand, couldn't get her out of his head. He saw her everywhere. In the corridors, the garden, the kitchen. His thoughts were consumed by her. He tried to distract himself, the company, his friends, even his countless opportunities. But nothing mattered anymore. All he wanted was her. The night of the charity gala arrived. It was one of the most important events of the year, a night where the Harrington family would shine. The world would be watching. The company's stockholders, celebrities, and power brokers would mingle in the ballroom. It was a night of grandeur, and everything had to be perfect. Aiden's father, Victor Harrington, stood at the center of it all, greeting high-profile guests, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras. Claire, Aiden's mother, stood beside him, radiant as always, holding a glass of champagne, a perfect figure of grace and elegance. But Aiden? Aiden was nowhere to be found. He wasn't in the ballroom, wasn't mingling with the guests. He was in the back of the mansion, pacing nervously in front of the staff quarters. He had no business being here. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't even be thinking about Cynthia. But he couldn't stop it. Cynthia was in the hallway, just outside the service entrance, trying to make her way to the kitchen to prepare the next round of hors d'oeuvres. She had just finished setting up the bathroom for the guests when she heard footsteps behind her. Without turning, she knew who it was. Aiden. Her heart skipped, her palms tingled with the shock of his presence. She took a quick breath, trying to steady herself, but when she turned around to face him, she was caught. He was standing there, closer than ever, his expression unreadable. The air around them crackled with tension. "I thought you'd be in the ballroom," Cynthia said, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to act as if everything were normal. She had to maintain the distance. She couldn't let this moment get away from her. Aiden, however, wasn't paying attention to the walls she was trying to put up. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I couldn't," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about you." Cynthia's heart thudded in her chest. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She took a step back, instinctively pulling away from him. "Aiden, no. This is wrong." But Aiden took another step forward, his eyes searching hers, his hand reaching out as if to touch her, to make her see what he was feeling, what he couldn't articulate. What if it isn't? Before she could respond, a voice broke through the thick tension between them. "Aiden." Victor Harrington's voice rang out from the far end of the hallway, and they both turned. Cynthia's heart plummeted. She had to get away, she had to leave before Aiden's father saw them together. But Aiden didn't move. He stood still, caught between his father and Cynthia. For the first time, he hesitated. "I'll be right there, Dad," Aiden called back, his voice tight. He turned to Cynthia. His gaze softened. "We'll finish this later." And then he was gone. Cynthia stood there, breathless, her heart racing. She had just witnessed a moment of vulnerability from him. But she also knew that it could never happen again. She couldn't risk it. The next day, the air between them was thick with awkwardness and regret. Neither of them spoke to each other, but the tension hung in the air. Cynthia tried to pretend like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. She had seen the way Aiden looked at her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope, even though she knew it was a dangerous thing to do. But Aiden couldn't let it go. His mind kept replaying the encounter, the way her skin had glowed under the dim lights of the hallway, the way she had looked at him with those eyes, filled with fear, but also with something else. Something real. By the time the gala was over and the mansion had quieted down for the night, Aiden stood at the balcony, looking out into the night sky. The world below him seemed so far away. His life, his future, his duties. But none of it mattered. Not now. Not anymore. He wanted to be with her. He wanted to break every rule for a chance at something real. But he was the heir to the Harrington fortune. His world wasn't designed for this kind of love. And as he turned to go back inside, his father's voice once again echoed through his mind. This is what you were born into, Aiden. Nothing more, nothing less. But what if that wasn't all he was meant to be? Do you think Aiden should follow his heart, or stay within the boundaries his family has set for him? Would you choose love over everything else? Share your thoughts below. The days after the gala felt like a whirlwind, but for Cynthia, it was as if time had slowed to a crawl. The mansion, usually full of chatter and activity, felt like a prison now. She moved through its halls as if trapped in a dream or a nightmare. Every time she crossed paths with Aiden, her heart would race, and her palms would sweat. She could feel his presence even when he wasn't near. It was impossible to ignore him, impossible to pretend like that moment in the hallway hadn't happened. Her mind told her she should avoid him, keep her distance, and never let herself get caught up in something so dangerous. But her heart? Her heart ached for him. Every time she saw the haunted look in his eyes, every time their gazes accidentally locked across a room, she felt something pull at her, something magnetic, something that went beyond the roles they had been forced into. What was it about him? Cynthia had always dreamed of a better life, but she had always known that she could never have it. The reality of her situation was far too strong to ignore. She wasn't meant to be part of his world. But the way he had looked at her that night, with desire, vulnerability, and longing, made her question everything. Aiden's restlessness was growing too. He couldn't escape the feeling Cynthia had stirred inside him. No matter how hard he tried to distract himself with work, with his family obligations, his mind kept returning to her. It had been a week since the gala, but he still couldn't get the image of Cynthia out of his head. The way she had looked at him, so much fear, yet so much strength. The way she had pulled back, like she wanted him to leave, but also wanted him to stay. And that voice of hers, soft, yet firm. Don't pretend like you didn't see me. What did that mean? Did she want him to stay away? Or was she giving him permission to see her, to acknowledge her? Aiden didn't know, but he couldn't stop himself from wanting to find out. The mansion, once his sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. His father's looming expectations, his mother's icy indifference, the pressure to be the perfect heir, it was all too much. And now, with Cynthia in his mind, everything seemed pointless. Could he live with the idea of never having her? It was a Thursday evening when Aiden found himself walking through the mansion's back hallways once again, this time without a destination in mind. He was supposed to meet his father for a business call, but his mind wasn't on the deal. It wasn't on anything to do with the future of the Harrington empire. His steps faltered when he saw her. She was pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway, humming softly under her breath. The soft glow from the chandelier overhead bathed her in a warm light. She looked so out of place here, so unseen. Her eyes were downcast, focused on the cart, but Aiden didn't need to see her face to know she was aware of him. He could feel it. He stopped just a few feet away, his heart racing. He didn't know what to say. The space between them felt suffocating, yet strangely electrified. Cynthia finally lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze for the briefest of moments. That's all it took for both of them to be swept back into the whirlpool of emotions they had been trying to escape. Aiden's lips parted, the words ready to spill out, but she spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Aiden felt a pang in his chest. He stepped forward without thinking, drawn to her. "I didn't mean to make things harder," he said softly, his voice strained. "I just can't stop thinking about you." Cynthia shook her head, her eyes flashing with something unreadable. "You don't get to think about me," she said, her voice tightening. "Not like that. You're not allowed to. You and I, we don't exist in the same world." Her words hit Aiden like a slap, but something inside him snapped. He couldn't let her go. Not like this. Why? He demanded, his voice rising slightly, though he quickly caught himself. Why can't we exist in the same world? She stepped back, her hands trembling as she gripped the cart. Because, Aiden, you're not allowed to want me. You never were. You never will be. The sting of her words tore through him, but something in his chest burned even brighter. He couldn't let this be the end. He couldn't just walk away. He reached for her arm, gently but firmly, stopping her retreat. Don't run from me, he said, his voice low, intense. Not anymore. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, Aiden saw something break behind her eyes, fear and desire tangled together. But before he could speak again, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. It was Victor, Aiden's father. He was close. Too close. Without another word, Cynthia pulled away, her body tense with fear. We can't do this, she whispered, turning away quickly. And before Aiden could say another word, she disappeared down the hall, leaving him standing there with only his thoughts, and a growing determination that he had no idea how to stop. The following days felt like a blur. Both Cynthia and Aiden moved through the mansion like shadows, avoiding each other at all costs. But the tension between them was palpable. The more they tried to ignore it, the harder it became to keep their feelings buried. Aiden's mind kept circling back to one thought. He couldn't walk away. But what could he do? How could he change the path that had been set for him since birth? His future was already mapped out. The family business, the wealth, the prestige. His father had made it clear that there was no room for distractions, no room for the kind of love Aiden was beginning to feel for Cynthia. He wasn't allowed to be with someone like her. But the more he tried to focus on his responsibilities, the more his thoughts kept straying to her. And he realized something. He was falling for her. Do you think Aiden should fight for what he wants, even if it means going against everything he's known? Or should he step back and let Cynthia go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days after their last confrontation were filled with an aching silence. Aiden couldn't focus. He was distracted by the smallest things. The way Cynthia's laughter used to fill the air, the way her footsteps echoed in the mansion like a soft rhythm that had always been there, but now seemed so far away. Every time he thought about her, his mind would race back to that moment in the hallway when she had told him, "You're not allowed to want me. You never were. You never will be." But he couldn't understand why. Why had she pushed him away? Was it because of the walls between them? The classes, the expectations, the roles they were both born into? Aiden had always thought his wealth and name meant something. Meant he was important, meant people would bow to him, respect him. But with Cynthia? It meant nothing. It was nothing. Because she had refused him. And for the first time in his life, Aiden couldn't get what he wanted. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the truth finally shattered everything. Aiden had come back from a meeting with his father, his mind still heavy with the weight of responsibility. He was supposed to focus on the future of the family business, but the future felt more distant with every passing moment. He entered the grand mansion, expecting nothing but the quiet hum of staff working in the background, but something felt different today. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding. He walked through the hallway, only to find a small gathering near the kitchen. The staff were whispering in hushed tones, some of them glancing at him with uneasy eyes. "Cynthia?" Aiden asked, his voice almost a whisper as he approached the group. His stomach twisted at the thought of what he might hear. "She's gone," one of the housekeepers replied quietly, her voice strained. "She left last night. Just packed up and disappeared without a word." Aiden froze. Gone? He couldn't believe it. Cynthia couldn't have just left. She couldn't have walked away, not after everything they had shared, the moments, the stolen glances, the longing between them. Aiden's heart began to race, his thoughts spiraling. Where did she go? Why would she leave without telling him? What had he done wrong? Aiden didn't waste another moment. He marched straight to his father's office, demanding answers. Victor Harrington, sitting at his massive desk, looked up as Aiden stormed in, his expression unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Aiden," he said, his voice calm but clipped. "What's going on? Where is she?" Aiden demanded, his eyes wide with desperation. "Cynthia." I need to know what happened to her. Victor paused for a moment, a look of discomfort flickering across his face before he spoke again. She left, he said, his tone even. And she's never coming back. Aiden's world seemed to stop. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Never coming back? He stepped forward, his fists clenched. But what did you do? Why would she leave? Victor's eyes hardened. She was getting too close, son. Too close to you. And she wasn't meant to be a part of your life. She was a maid, nothing more. You know that. The truth hit Aiden like a ton of bricks. The harsh reality of the class divide, the societal rules that had governed his life, everything he had been raised to believe, it all fell away. Victor stood up from his desk, his voice growing firmer. Aiden, I don't know what you saw in her, but she was never meant for you. She was nothing more than a distraction. You can't let someone like her get in the way of your future. Aiden stared at his father, the anger and betrayal welling up inside him. You pushed her out. You forced her to leave. He clenched his jaw, trying to hold back his fury. And you think I'll just forget about her? You think I can just move on like she was nothing? Victor's face darkened, the tension between father and son palpable. Yes, because that's the way the world works. And it's time you realize that. Aiden couldn't breathe. His chest felt tight, his vision blurred as rage and heartbreak consumed him. Everything he thought he knew about love, about life, was now shattered. He had been so wrong. In that moment, he realized what he had lost. Cynthia wasn't just the maid. She wasn't just a temporary part of his life. She was the one person who had shown him something real, something raw. He couldn't go back. He couldn't live in a world where his family told him who he could and couldn't love. But the truth had already been set in motion. Cynthia was gone. And it was his fault. Aiden stormed out of his father's office, his heart racing, his head spinning. He had to find her. He had to make things right no matter what it cost. Later that night, Aiden sat in his room, staring at the phone in his hand. He had tried to call Cynthia, but there was no answer. She was gone. She had vanished without a trace. But something in him refused to give up. He would find her. He finally picked up his phone and dialed her number one more time. And then, to his surprise, a voice answered. Aiden. Cynthia's voice was soft, hesitant. His heart skipped a beat. Cynthia, where are you? Please, just tell me where you are. There was a long silence on the other end before she finally spoke again. I can't be with you, Aiden, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You're not the person I thought you were. You're just like them. You're just like your father. You want me because I'm forbidden, but you can't see me for who I really am. Aren't you worth fighting for? Aiden said, his voice cracking. Don't you think we deserve a chance? We don't have to follow their rules. We can make our own. But Cynthia was quiet for a long time before she answered. Some rules are never meant to be broken, Aiden. Some things aren't meant to happen. And with that, the line went dead. Do you think Aiden should fight for his love, even if it means defying everything he's been taught? Or should he respect Cynthia's decision and let her go? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The days that followed her conversation with Aiden felt like an endless blur for Cynthia. She had left the mansion, packed her bags in the dead of night, and fled to a small apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her own space, her own place to hide from everything she had left behind. Every corner of the apartment felt like a cage, though. The quiet was deafening. Her thoughts were louder than the city sounds outside. She hadn't meant to hurt Aiden. She hadn't meant to disappear. But the truth was she had to leave. Aiden was never meant for her. The weight of that truth suffocated her. She was just a maid. He was the heir to the Harrington fortune. They lived in different worlds, and those worlds were not meant to collide. Cynthia couldn't keep pretending like their love was real, like it was something that could happen. The walls that had kept her out of his world were too high, too thick. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but all she could see was Aiden's face, the way his expression had crumbled when she told him she couldn't be with him. The raw emotion, the pleading in his voice. It had broken her heart to see him hurt. But she had to protect herself. She had to walk away before she lost herself entirely. And yet, in the silence of the night, She still wondered what could have been. What if she had said yes? What if they had defied everything and fought for their love? But there was no what if. There was only the reality of who they were and what they would always be. She had made her choice. Aiden couldn't get the image of her out of his mind. Cynthia's face, pale and full of sadness, haunted him. Her words, the quiet rejection, played on a loop in his head. I can't be with you, Aiden. You're just like them. The more he tried to move on, the more he realized just how deep he had fallen into her world. His world, the mansion, the money, the expectations, it had all felt so meaningless. He could inherit the company, sign all the right deals, charm all the right people, but none of that mattered without her. Aiden stood by the window in his empty bedroom, staring out at the city below. The glass felt cold against his palms, his breath fogging up the surface as he looked at the horizon. He should have been at peace, but he wasn't. Everything felt like a lie. His father, Victor, had been relentless about his future. The deals, the public appearances, the endless responsibilities. Aiden had tried to play the part, but his heart wasn't in it. And it never would be, not without Cynthia by his side. Aiden had tried to tell himself that he could move on, that he could forget her, but the ache in his chest wouldn't go away. He needed her, but the more he tried to reach for her, the further she pulled away. It was as if the universe had placed an invisible wall between them, a wall that neither of them could break down. Days turned into weeks. Aiden's father's expectations grew more demanding. Every day Victor piled on more work, more pressure, more stress. It was as if Aiden had become nothing but an extension of the Harrington empire, a tool for the family's survival. The world he was trying to escape, his father's cold influence, the suffocating expectations, closed in on him. He couldn't breathe. He didn't want to live this life anymore. And yet, there was one thing he couldn't escape. Cynthia. That night, Aiden found himself in the one place he could always escape, the empty ballroom. It was where he had spent so many lonely nights as a child, staring at the grand mirrors, dreaming of a life outside the one his father had crafted for him. Aiden stood alone in the center of the room, the massive chandelier above him casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. His thoughts were a mess. His father's harsh words, the missed opportunities, the anger, the confusion. But beneath it all, there was the longing, the unshakable, uncontrollable yearning for Cynthia. He needed her, but she was gone. With one last, desperate breath, Aiden dialed her number, his hands shaking. He didn't know if she'd pick up. He didn't know if he could face her rejection again. But he had to try. He had to hear her voice one last time. The phone rang. And then, finally, she answered. Cynthia's voice on the other end was softer than Aiden had ever heard it before. She was tired. She was broken. Aiden, she whispered, her voice cracking. You shouldn't have called me. I can't do this. I can't go back. I made my decision. No, Aiden pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. Cynthia, please. You don't have to do this. We can be together. We can make this work. We can. I'm not the woman you think I am, she interrupted, her voice trembling. I'm not strong enough for this. I'm not meant to be with you. You deserve someone who belongs in your world. Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. But Aiden couldn't stop himself. No, Cynthia, he said, his voice desperate. I don't want someone from my world. I want you. Please, don't walk away from me. Don't walk away from us. But there was a long silence on the other end of the line, before Cynthia finally spoke again. I'm sorry, Aiden. I'm so sorry. And then the line went dead. Aiden stood in the ballroom, his phone still pressed to his ear, the silence swallowing him whole. The weight of her rejection crushed him, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. Cynthia had made her choice, and Aiden realized, with devastating clarity, that he had lost her. He had lost everything. Do you think Aiden should keep fighting for Cynthia, or is it time to accept that some things are just too impossible to change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Cynthia spent the following days alone in her small apartment, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Every day was the same, waking up to the same empty space, the same quiet, the same heartache. She had done what she thought was necessary. She had protected herself by walking away from Aiden, convinced that she was doing the right thing. But with every passing day, the weight of that decision pressed down on her more and more. Her phone remained silent. There were no calls from Aiden. No messages. He had given her the space she had asked for, and yet, every moment of silence reminded her of just how much she missed him. She had tried to push him out of her mind, tried to remind herself of the reasons why she couldn't be with him. She was a maid. She was supposed to stay in the background, never in the spotlight, never dreaming of anything more. But Aiden had made her believe in a world where she didn't have to hide, where she could stand next to him, not as a servant, not as a worker, but as herself. And that was something she had never allowed herself to hope for. The truth was clear, she couldn't live without him. But how could she return to the Harrington mansion? How could she ever face him again, knowing the walls between them were higher than ever? She stood in front of her bedroom mirror one night, staring at her reflection. The woman she saw was familiar, yet so foreign to her now. She had spent her entire life hiding, playing the role she was born into. But now, looking at her reflection, she saw something different. She saw strength. She saw courage. She saw a woman who could love freely, who could be loved, no matter what the world thought. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. She knew what she had to do. Aiden had been pacing his mansion's corridors for hours, unable to sit still. His father had been relentless as always, pushing him toward the future he didn't want. But now, after the conversation with Cynthia, he couldn't focus on anything else. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about how she had left, how he had lost her. For the first time in his life, Aiden felt like he was standing on the edge of something impossible. The future his father wanted for him, the legacy, the empire, the wealth, felt so empty without her. He realized, with heartbreaking clarity, that all the things he had been chasing his entire life didn't matter anymore. He had been living for everyone else. But what did he really want? The question echoed in his mind, louder and louder, until it was the only thing he could hear. And then, in a moment of quiet desperation, Aiden finally found the answer. He didn't want the empire. He didn't want the title. He didn't care about the expectations. He wanted Cynthia. And he was done waiting for permission to love her. That night, Aiden made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't sit in his mansion anymore, pretending that he could forget about Cynthia. He couldn't live a life built on lies and expectations. He had to see her. He had to fight for her. He grabbed his coat and left the house, slipping out into the cool night air. The world outside felt vast, full of possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. He drove through the city, his mind focused entirely on one thing, Cynthia. Aiden didn't know where she was, but he had a feeling. He parked his car outside her apartment building, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't care that it was late. He didn't care that this could be the biggest mistake of his life. He needed to see her. He walked up the stairs to her apartment, his hand trembling as he knocked on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Cynthia stood there, her hair loose, wearing a simple white dress. She looked like the woman Aiden had fallen in love with. But there was a sadness in her eyes, something deep and unresolved. "Aiden," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't keep living in a world without you. I don't want the empire. I don't want the life my father set out for me. I want you, Cynthia. I need you." Cynthia's breath caught in her throat. She had heard him say those words, but it was like she couldn't process them. It felt like a dream. "Then we can't?" "I know," he interrupted. "I know it's not easy. But I've spent my whole life chasing something that wasn't real. I don't want that anymore. I want to build something with you. I want to fight for you, no matter what." Cynthia stared at him, her eyes welling with tears. She felt the weight of his words in her chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, hope stirred within her. Maybe, just maybe, they could have a chance. "You don't understand," she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm not meant to be with you. I'm not supposed to be the one you choose." "You are," Aiden said, stepping closer, taking her hands in his. "You're the only one I want. You are the one I choose." Cynthia took a shaky breath, her chest tightening as she looked into his eyes. For a moment, it felt like the world had shifted. There was no more fear. No more doubt. She had spent so much of her life trying to survive in a world that didn't see her, but now, for the first time, she realized that she was worthy of love, his love. "Aiden, I don't know if this will work," she whispered, her voice filled with vulnerability. "But I want to try." Aiden smiled, his heart full. "We'll figure it out together. We'll build something new, something of our own." And for the first time in months, Cynthia felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it would never be easy. But it was real. Do you think love is enough to overcome all the obstacles in a relationship, or does reality always get in the way? Can Aiden and Cynthia truly make it work? Share your thoughts in the comments below. It had been a week since Aiden and Cynthia had made their decision to fight for their love, and the stakes had never been higher. For Aiden, everything was on the line. His family, his legacy, his future, they all rested on a single decision: whether or not he was willing to lose everything to be with the woman he loved. But now, after weeks of quiet rebellion against his father's expectations, the truth couldn't be hidden any longer. It was the night of the Harrington family gala. The same night Aiden had first seen Cynthia, the night everything had shifted. But now, this gala had become something else entirely. A night of reckoning. His father, Victor Harrington, had been pressing him for months about his future. Aiden had long known he would eventually have to choose, either follow his father's path and take his rightful place in the family business or walk away and lose everything. But tonight, Victor was expecting an answer. The final answer. Aiden had already made his decision. He didn't want the empire. He wanted Cynthia. But could he get her without losing everything? At the same gala, Cynthia stood in the back, watching the extravagant event unfold before her. The opulence, the guests, the flawless perfection of the night only highlighted how out of place she felt. She was the maid, the invisible figure in the background, a face that most people wouldn't even notice. She had promised herself she wouldn't attend this year's gala, that she would remain invisible. She didn't belong here. But there she was, standing in the shadows, unable to stop her heart from aching. Aiden had told her he wanted to be with her. He had promised they could fight for this love, but how could she believe it? She had seen how quickly things could change in a world ruled by wealth, status, and power. She had already lost herself once. What if the same thing happened again? Her thoughts were interrupted when she felt a familiar presence beside her. She turned to find Aiden, standing there with a look of determination in his eyes. He was dressed in a dark suit, looking every bit the part of the heir to the Harrington empire, but there was something different in his gaze. He wasn't pretending anymore. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I came for you," he said, his voice strong, but there was a vulnerability in it that softened his words. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Cynthia felt the warmth of his touch. "Aiden, you don't have to do this," she said, shaking her head. "This life is yours. You don't have to throw it away for me." He looked at her with an intensity she couldn't ignore. "I want to throw it away. I don't want their world anymore. I want this. I want you. You're the only thing that feels real in all of this." The words hung in the air, thick with emotion. But then, from across the room, Victor appeared, and the cold reality of their situation crashed back down on them. Victor's eyes locked onto Aiden, and without a word, he walked toward them. Aiden's face hardened. This was it. The final confrontation. Victor stood tall, his presence commanding the room even without saying a word. His sharp gaze flicked from Aiden to Cynthia, his face a mask of cold fury. "Aiden," Victor began, his voice low, but filled with power, "what are you doing here with this woman?" Cynthia felt the weight of his words settle on her like a heavy cloak, but she stood her ground. "I love her, father," Aiden replied, his voice stronger than it had ever been. "And I won't let you destroy her, or us, for the sake of your empire." Victor's eyes flicked to Cynthia once more, an unreadable expression on his face. "This is madness. You can't possibly think you have a future with someone like her. She's a maid, Aiden. You don't get to throw away everything for something that isn't even real." Cynthia flinched at his words, but Aiden stood firm. You don't get to decide what's real for me, father. I'm not living my life for you anymore. Victor's eyes narrowed. Then you're not my son. You'll lose everything. Everything. His words were sharp, cutting through the air with a cold finality. Aiden stepped closer to Cynthia, his hand finding hers once more. I'm willing to lose it all, he said, his voice unwavering. Because I know who I am now. I know who I want to be. For a long moment, Victor stood in silence. His face was unreadable. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he turned to leave, his expression hardening. Then you're on your own, Victor said, his voice cold as ice. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. Victor's departure left a strange emptiness in the air, but Aiden didn't feel the weight of it the way he thought he would. Instead, he felt lighter, freer than he had in years. He turned to Cynthia, who was still standing by his side, her face filled with disbelief and awe. You didn't have to choose me, Aiden, she whispered. You didn't have to lose everything. Aiden smiled, his eyes warm. You are everything, Cynthia. I don't need anything else. The air between them shifted, filled with a quiet strength. For the first time, both Aiden and Cynthia knew what it felt like to be seen, to be chosen. And then, without hesitation, Aiden kissed her. A kiss filled with everything they had been holding back, with everything they had been fighting for. As they pulled away, Aiden took her hand in his. Let's build something new, he said softly. A life of our own. No more hiding. No more secrets. And Cynthia, for the first time in her life, truly believed it. Do you think Aiden made the right choice? Or did he risk everything for something he might never be able to have? What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.